Welcome to Breaching the Boardroom, where leadership, growth, and strategy come together. Each episode features straight talk conversations with industry leaders and innovators who share how they navigate a fast-moving world while keeping their businesses on track. Well, our goal is often to break down complex topics like AI, cyber threats, and IT strategy for mid-market executives. Today, we're stepping out of the server room and onto the diamond. We're focusing on the pure entrepreneurial grit it takes to build a thriving business and a lasting culture from the ground up. Joining us today is a longtime family friend of mine, Allen Stein, the visionary founder and former president and CEO of the Lexington Legends. Allen didn't just bring minor league baseball to Lexington. He took a calculated risk, mastered the art of the ultimate customer experience, and built a beloved community staple. Today, we're digging into his playbook on visionary leadership, building a winning front office culture, and the business strategies that turn a wild idea into a home run. Allen, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you, Zach. This will be fun, I'm sure.
Yeah, great to see you. I want to start, with the vision, and at the top, you took a minor league baseball team from just a concept, just an idea, to a beloved community staple. I have memories of going to games with my family many years ago. I don't want to age myself here. It's a big undertaking. And I'm sure there were a ton of hurdles and obstacles in the way. Would love to hear, your recollection of those early hurdles and what it took to keep the vision alive as you were working through them.
Well, it's a long story with a short title. The title that you've heard many times about an overnight sensation. That, of course, there's no such thing as that, unless I guess the first time you go buy a lottery ticket, you hit.
My head, exactly.
I've had the entrepreneurial spirit my whole life. I started my very first business when I was in fifth grade, writing lyrics to popular songs and selling them, and creating a little business with a labor force, and just growing from there. My career has included owning, when I was in high school, a vending machine company. We acquired locations and bought machines, cigarette machines, candy machines, jukeboxes, riding horses, those sorts of things, and set up a route all throughout central and south central and eastern Kentucky. I had a small fleet, I called it, 2 step vans. Where we and 3 people who worked with me and for me. That lasted all the way through my college years. And instead of going to law school, I decided I wanted to stay in the business route. And one thing, as my dad always said, find something you know most about. When I got out of the university, I started a college bar and restaurant. And so, it's just gone from there. And so I was in the hospitality industry, and then that branched out, and we, with some partners, got into real estate development, building shopping centers and housing developments and those sorts of things, and ultimately got into the radio business. And then in my mid-40s, we were fortunate enough, as part of the telecommunications revolution in the mid-90s, we were able to sell our radio stations. I was too young and not ready to be retired, although we had great fortune with the sale of those radio stations. And a project that I began simply as an idea with a couple of buddies sitting around in a bar talking about baseball, our mutual love, about bringing professional baseball to Lexington, simply as an advocate, not as a business enterprise. And that started in 1984 when I read an article in the Sporting News, which was the Bible of baseball in those days, well before Sports Center and the proliferation of the internet and the wide-ranging access to sports. You read the Sporting News, and the Sporting News in 1984 wrote a big article about expansion of Major League Baseball and the corollary of that, of course, was that if baseball was going to expand, they would need farm teams, minor league affiliates. And the three of us sitting over a cocktail and a couple of cold beers decided that Lexington should be part of that revolution. That was the spark that lit the fire in toward the late 90s when we did sell our radio stations, and I found myself with some capital and some time. I said, "What the heck? Let's just do this." We had been trying for many, many years to inspire others in our government, in our city, to make this happen. We just wanted to go to the ballpark and watch baseball. Could never make that happen. For whatever reason, Lexington was resistant as a community to invest in making that happen. The investment, of course, would be building a stadium. That was typical. That's what you did if you were in professional sports. Generally, you would acquire, own, or develop a franchise in whatever particular sport arena you would be in, and you would work in concert with the municipalities in which you found yourselves, and you would build a stadium or an arena or whatever it would be for, whether it be basketball, hockey, soccer, baseball. And we could not get a deal done. There are books that have been written and movies have been made about the whole process. Suffice to say that until I sold the radio stations and had enough capital on my own with a couple of friends, it was not going to become a reality in Central Kentucky. Even at that, we made the determination that our sights had been set on something specific, going all the way back to that Sporting News article in 1984 about Lexington, Kentucky hosting and being the home of a Double-A Southern League, Major League affiliated baseball team. And that was the whole plan from 1984 all the way up to 1998. And when we had our final rejection from the urban county government and officials at the state level in terms of investing in a stadium, when we sold the radio stations, I said, the heck with it, I'm going to do it myself. And, of course, everyone told me that was impossible. It had never been done before. You can't privately build a stadium and make the numbers work. And in fact, one lovely evening, I'm sitting on the porch of my house with my best buddy and my son Scooter, who's named after a baseball player, Phil Rizzuto, the Hall of Fame Scooter, said to me, and at that point, he was 8 years old, maybe, I don't know. And he said, "Dad, have you done the numbers? Have you really looked into this?"
Mark, good.
It's like you always tell me when I ask you to do my homework with me, have you done your homework? And of course I responded, yeah, of course I have. I've been a successful entrepreneur. I've built businesses and had great success. Of course I've done the numbers. But it bothered me enough that I couldn't sleep all night. And I had a bit of an epiphany in the morning. And I said, I have run these numbers forever. And you can't build a stadium and a franchise and start from scratch in a community that doesn't have a professional sports enterprise if you're going to do it at the Double-A level. But what if maybe we took a look at building a Single-A franchise in Lexington? Now, for those of your listeners and watchers who don't understand the hierarchy of baseball, you've got a major league team that is in the largest cities in the country: Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Baltimore, in our area of the world, Cincinnati. And they have farm teams or teams where they develop players and go up the rungs. And there's AAA, which are in very large cities, but just under the major league. In our area, we're talking about Nashville, Louisville, Indianapolis. And then there's Double-A below that. Double-A is where we always felt like Lexington would fit in. Similar contemporary cities who had minor league baseball, like Knoxville and Tuscaloosa and Birmingham and Orlando and Jacksonville and places like that, Asheville. We felt like that's where Lexington would fit. And we never wavered from that. But then in consideration of Single-A baseball, those were in different smaller communities. You were talking about Hagerstown, Maryland, and Kannapolis, North Carolina, Hickory, North Carolina, Charleston, West Virginia. And so I started putting the numbers together for single A baseball. What would it take to do that? And what I quickly came upon was that in single A baseball, we could buy a franchise in 1998 dollars numbers. We could buy a franchise for about $3.5 million, as opposed to the 7 to 8 million it would take to get a double A team. In building a stadium, you only had to build 4,000 fixed seats for a facility to qualify for single A baseball, whereas you had to have 6,000 seats for double A. Well, that 2,000 extra seats at an approximate cost of $2,500 per fixed seat. All of a sudden now, single A baseball versus double A baseball, you're talking $10 million differential. That delta was significant. And the operating costs would be less, et cetera, all the way down the line. And so I said, maybe we can do this. So we started looking at the numbers. And in fact, and indeed, we felt like ticket sales would, if we did it correctly, ticket sales, merchandise sales, food and beverage sales, sponsorship sales. If we did it correctly and the attendance was the same, irrespective of what level of baseball we played, we could make it work. Well, those numbers did work, but I had nobody who believed in me. I mean, this was Lexington, Kentucky. And, the comparable idea that we heard from so many people was the difference between in the 90s, what was the standard bred product that you got at the Red Mile versus the thoroughbreds at Keeneland. And would Lexington accept a single A team? And in fact, and indeed, would people go see the Kannapolis Intimidators or the Hickory Crawdads instead of a team from peer communities in the Southeastern Conference, from Knoxville, Birmingham, etc.? Would Lexington people accept that? We actually went to Chattanooga, Tennessee, for 3 weeks and surveyed all of their fans coming out of the ballpark. And the reason we went there was Chattanooga was a Cincinnati Reds affiliate. They were a double A team in the Southern League, to which we had originally aspired. And we asked 4 basic, very simple questions without any crosstabs. Did you have a good time? Who won the game? Who were the teams that you just watched affiliated with? What classification of baseball did you just watch? And what we discovered was that if you did a good job in your fan service, if the beer was cold, if the hot dogs were hot, if the entertainment on the field was great, and you were fan-centric, the fans, as it turned out in those 3-week survey in Chattanooga, 51% of them did not know who won the damn game. 51%. And didn't care. And over 60% of them did not know that they had just seen a Cincinnati Reds affiliate. They didn't really know what they were watching. And over 72% did not know the classification of baseball they had just watched. Many answers, we got answers all over the board, including Little League, Major League, Japanese League. There was a team that came through that had a couple of Japanese players and one Korean. And so, some of the fans said we must have been watching Japanese ball. It was crazy. We came back with all that information with the confidence that if we did it right, we could be successful in Lexington. So we began our quest to convince investors, first of all, investors, that we could make this work. And it was a bit of a tough sale. And then when we couldn't find a site, we had hoped to work with the city and do something that was in the downtown matrix to build a stadium. Our research told us we needed to try to do that, but we couldn't get a deal with the city or the state. So we had to look for other properties and locations. And when we settled on a site, when I personally settled on a site on the north side of Lexington, still close to downtown, inside New Circle Road, which is our initial urban boundary. Some of my investors said, well, nobody will go to the north end of town. So they dropped out. It was a process, but we eventually were able, along with the capital that I was willing to take a chance with, we were able to raise enough money to at least start the project, to buy a franchise and hire an architect and find a construction company And we built our stadium, and we were the first in America to do that, privately funded stadium. And until from 1998, when we first opened the office, to the spring of April in 2001, it was the wild, wild west for us. We didn't really know what we were doing. We had consultants, and we hired people to help us kind of guide the path. And I opened myself to a lot of mentors in the business to learn as much and as best I could. But it was a process, and we had an education process in our community to convince people of what we were trying to accomplish. When we finally opened on April 9th, 2001, we were an overnight sensation. And the one line that we heard over and over and over again was, "We had no idea that this is what you were talking about." And, which was sort of frustrating because
Sure.
we had spent a lot of time and energy and effort and
Trying to
expertise trying to convince people what we were doing. A quick, small anecdote about that was in the early 2000s, I was awarded the Communicator of the Year award by the Public Relations Society of America. And we're in Washington, D.C. at this luncheon, and I get this award, and I took my dad with me. And a reporter asked my dad after I had received this thing, he said, "You must be awfully proud of your son." And Dad said, "Yeah, I am, but I'm a little bit confused. This award is for Communicator of the Year." He said, "If he was such a good communicator, what took him so long to get this thing to happen?" And that sort of wrapped it up. In my mind, he very concisely and succinctly rolled this whole process into just one quick line. There
You're
it
a good
was.
communicator in retrospect. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think I have two reactions. One, thank you for the story and the history. The first is, and this is a little bit of a snarky comment, but I did learn a lot about geography of small towns throughout the Southeast thanks to the South Atlantic League. So yes, I know where Kannapolis, North
Yeah.
Carolina is. Thanks to my experience with that league and Legends games, and otherwise I probably never would have. The second point, and I think what's really interesting and maybe could have some value to the folks listening, you went from trying to start a baseball team to really starting an entertainment and hospitality business, right? I mean, that's the fundamental shift, and
Right.
the surveys with the Lookouts in Chattanooga prove it. So you built this family experience, this entertainment, this hospitality business, and that wasn't really on your radar. I wouldn't expect at the genesis of the idea. I know you said that you were not ready to retire, and I don't know if you still are. I think you told me 2 weeks ago that you just can't bring yourself to do it. But have you taken that transition, that ability to pivot where the focus is and where the what is, from this experience with the Legends to other businesses that you've worked with or other leaders that you've worked with, to make that pivot and then lean in, right? Lean into that experience based.
Yeah. Zach, it's really interesting. I do some guest lecturing at all the universities, mostly business schools, sports management programs, that sort of stuff. It's, 6, 7 times a year. Just was in a class this week, and somebody just asked me. One of the kids at UK in the Gatton School said, "Tell me, what was the most difficult thing about this process?" And it's really simple for me, and I have told this story many, many times. When I first opened the office, I hired a couple of people who had experience in baseball. They were coming to us from Maryland, and they were the core folks. And then we hired an intern to do some things, and then I set about for the next 3 or 4 months to assemble what I consider to be a dream team of folks, literally, who would understand the dream that I had. What was this vision that I had in my head of what we were going to sell to the community, how we were going to finance it, how we were going to construct it, how it was going to operate. And I put together, and it was the best sales job I did all along. We're bringing in these 22 to 25, mostly Lexingtonians from all walks of life to specialize in these areas that I had identified, along with the consultants that we hired, uh, and, and how we were going to assemble this thing. And it was the wild, wild west. But this group of heroic folks um, were part of this dream, this team, and they believed in it. And for 2.5 years, people would be in the office 6 or 7 days a week at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there was not a night that went by that somebody was still not in there working, thinking, fine tuning proposals and those sorts of things till midnight, all through this whole process. And these people were committed, they were dedicated, and they were unbelievably passionate, as was I. And we were a family, a team, to make this dream come true. And in fact, we did. And when we had opened the office in October of 1998, we just had an idea of what it was going to look like, and we built the airplane as we were going along. And then we got to April 9th, 2001, and we took a deep breath because we were still rushing. We didn't even get our certificate of occupancy for the stadium until 5 o'clock on opening day.
Oh, no.
I mean, how great! I mean, it was just wild, and it came off beautifully. Opening night, we had over 8,000 people in the ballpark. It was 72 beautiful degrees. We had an awesome team. We won that opening game 15-1. It was just it. You couldn't have drawn it up. But the next morning, I still was running on adrenaline, and at 6:30, I'm sitting in my office, and I'm beginning to realize, because I have been in a lot of other businesses over my career for 20, 30 years, and had a lot of people that worked for me and understood how businesses operate. One of the things about me is that I like to figure out how the gears work together to create a successful enterprise, and how do you monetize it, and how does it work. I mean, I like the teetering along with building a business. And I'm sitting there in my office that next morning, and I leaned back in my chair and I thought, gosh, now we've got all of a sudden, just overnight, literally overnight, we went from this company with a dream and a passion to a company now that has to operate a $10 million a year, forward-facing, consumer-based, fan-centric operation. And the hardest thing that I ever had to do, once I recognized that and I analyzed those 22 or 3 or 4 people, can't remember what the final number was, and I looked at them, and I had to ask myself honestly, are these the right people who certainly had the right skill sets to get us to where we are, but are they the same people now that can step in operationally and make this thing work? And I came to a quick conclusion that, nothing's ever black and white, but I came to the conclusion that I was probably going to have to transition out of most of those folks over the next year or two as we built this new business. Our original business was, let's build a business. Our next business was, let's run a business. Mm-hmm. And that was hard. That was very difficult. And I have been able to talk to a lot of folks over the years and pass that along, that it often takes a different set of skills to go from one place to the next. If you look at, for example, at Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, those guys were and guys like Bill Gates and all those guys, they all had certain skill sets, but they weren't necessarily the right people to move forward. And what you saw with Steve Jobs was they got it up and running, the dream was working, and then he wasn't the right guy to run the company. It went away, but without his passion and his vision, so they had to bring him back to get to where that company is today. And every company goes through, every entrepreneur discovers that. And every company has to do that transition, that evolution to keep the idea going. When you have an idea or a dream about a company, that is often just so far away from what the actual day-to-day is once you are there. And so if there was any great business lesson to learn along the way, it was that. And that's all against the underpinning that I so deeply hold. For successful businesses, you have to know who you are. You have to identify what your culture is, and you have to stay true to that. Our culture in the baseball business, and we've expanded that. We bought other teams in Michigan and a AAA team in Omaha, and then we got into the soccer business and had some business in indoor football, minor league sports. The culture foundation was the same everywhere. It's got to be fan centric. If you stay true to that, you can sustain and grow. And that's what we've tried to teach.
It's a great lesson, and that has to. I just can't imagine you sitting in your office on day two after opening day and having that realization. That had to be a very bittersweet moment for you. Yeah.
It was. And, it was catalyzed by one dear friend, great employee. We couldn't have built the thing, done it without him and his leadership and his judgment. But through the frantic opening of that last week and the last day, and then the success that we had, and observing him, I knew that he didn't have a place in this new world. He was the perfect guy to get us there. And then that's what got me thinking about everybody. Well, how many of these people are real? If I were starting this new company, if I had just bought this company, would these be the people that I would hire to go run this company? That's a harsh reality in many cases.
Yeah. I've got one more kind of broad question, and it's
Sure.
you touched on the fan centric experience, and I think
Right.
that for my memories, very fond memories of going to Legends games in those very very early days. That was certainly such a big piece of it. I think also there is the community engagement piece, which is adjacent to that, right, and still so important to the Legends, as I've seen, the team out in the community and participating in parades and hosting networking events that I come to here and there. That's really critical too. And I'd like to know a little bit more about how that was prioritized and still continues to be such a fundamental piece of the vision and the strategy for the Legends as a whole.
When we built the culture of our company, there were certain foundational things that we recognized would be essential for success, and some of them are real fundamental, basic philosophies. You got to make sure your fans, that you're catering to what they want. You've got to provide them with the product that they expect, and then you have to provide them with things that they weren't expecting that make the experience enhanced even more. But a major part of that is it's not necessarily what you would call philanthropy, although that's included in it. It's an acknowledgement in your culture that you don't, and we say this a lot, we don't, although we got to pay the bills, we're responsible to the world for making sure that that we run a responsible business and that we earn a responsible profit for our shareholders. But at the same time, we don't consider ourselves to be owners. We consider ourselves to be caretakers of a community asset. And as such, we have to recognize and understand that we need to be engaged in making the community better. The fact that we are here and operating and trying to do it at a high level is only part of it, because we also need to make the world, our small world, better because we are here. And that means being engaged in nonprofits and education and all sorts of different things that the Legends and all of our companies have reached out to participate in. It's really essential. And I've said this so many times. It's not just the right thing to do to be engaged in your community and supportive of things that matter. It's also good business. There is just absolutely no question that whatever investment you make into your community comes back to you so many fold. And, you can't even figure out what your ROI on it is because it's infinite. But what we do know through observation and other operations and things that we've been engaged in, if you don't do that, you don't, for whatever the magic potion is, you don't have the success, the business success that comes along hand in hand parallel to that.
Allen, this has been a treat. I really appreciate your time, your storytelling, your award winning communication. I want to close with one kind of fun question. Can you pinpoint the most memorable, and it doesn't have to be Lexington Legends, it can be any of your sports minor league franchises. Is there one memorable promotion or game day stunt that stands out as being a real mover and shaker?
It's hard to narrow that down to one. Zach, you've been around a long time. You may remember that for most of the years that I've been involved with the company, and there's a period, we sold our interest to another group in 2012. I retired. We just bought the team back a couple of years ago. So there was that void there. But I was involved in making a guarantee every single year that our team would win the first game. That started in our very first game on the road. We played in Charleston, West Virginia against the Alley Cats. And I told a reporter in Charleston, West Virginia, who called me and said, "You think you're going to win?" I said, "I guarantee you we win. If we don't win, I'll eat cat food in front of all your fans," which unfortunately we did lose that very first game. And I did eat cat food. Well, that took. Yeah. And so each year we've tried to come up with something that would be whimsical, fun for the fans. And unfortunately, more often than not, we've lost those bets, included, other than shaving my head. The year that I guaranteed we'd win and we lost, I had to shave my head. And so I ended up selling advertising logos on my bald head. There were another year where if we lost, I would have to be the bat boy. And so I did that, a Barca lounger next to the dugout. But the one that's really memorable and that most fans remember, even now, it's been, gosh, I guess that was 03, so 23 years ago. I guaranteed that we would win a game, our first game. And if we didn't, I would sit in my seat until we did. So we lost the first game, and that was okay. It was a beautiful night. It was 70 degrees. So I'm just camping out in my, people bringing, drinks and food and all that kind of stuff.
Backyard, right?
Yeah, it was fine. And then we played the next game the next night, and we lost again. And that was a little more difficult because the weather forecast was for it to go down to 36 degrees and sleet and snow. And we lost again. And then we lost a third consecutive night. And if not for a fluky play in the bottom of the ninth inning, we went 1-8 on that original homestand. And I would have been there, who knows. And yeah, that was pretty memorable. We had the in those days, they still had the news and weather helicopters, and the guys were zooming in every morning. It was on TV. It was huge. We calculated somewhere in the range of $1.5 million in free media, but it was a bit of a challenge. So we've done that every year, and we haven't decided what we're going to do this year yet. We're still a couple of weeks away. We'll come up with something.
I can't wait. At what point in those 3 days in your seat did you call the manager in for a little?
They were very understanding. That was JJ Cannon, and JJ actually came and sat with me one night, stayed with me. We had Steve Gall from Philip Gall's brought a tent, and we had it tented over, and people were bringing donuts and coffee and food. It was fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Allen, thanks. This was great. Really appreciate
it. You bet, Zach. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.